Okay, so let's talk about management interview questions. This is something I actually haven't talked about that much over the years since I've had a YouTube channel. Simply because as you get to higher and higher levels of like when you're interviewing for positions of increasing responsibility, kind of counterintuitively, they get less and less structured. Right? So it's for like entry-level jobs that you get the most structured interviews, the most formal, where, they'll have like standard questions that they ask every single candidate, like verbatim, and they don't really give you an opportunity to speak freely. You're just being interrogated, essentially. Very formal, lots of recruiter involvement, less of the hiring managers, right? But as you get into sort of management positions, you get supervisor level, mid-manager level, the various levels, upper mid-management, executive, and then the various levels of executive. Like, I have no idea, to be honest, how they do it at like Fortune 500 companies at the executive level. I've never been in those circles, so I don't know. But for smaller companies and mid-sized companies at the executive level, even going up to the board level, I mean, they have recruiters and things that do sort of due diligence. They do background checks and things like this. But beyond that, when it comes to how the actual interviews are conducted beyond the sort of screening stage, it's very informal. So it takes the form of these unstructured, free-flowing conversations. There's not a lot of formal questions where they'll talk to a candidate for like a $500,000 vice president job and say, tell me about yourself. They don't really do that. But yet there are certain questions that people do ask. And I remember years ago talking to somebody who ran the most, what's the word? Like the HR firm in my city that deals with the highest level jobs. And this person owns the company and they run it with, they have like several employees, all senior managers. I did work for them like way back in the day. And, this is a person who interviews like CEOs every 2 days, like CEO candidates every 2 days for mid-sized companies and for big companies too. And I did get to ask them, like, what questions do you ask? Like as is our standard questions that you ask? Because I was up for a few CEO level jobs and stuff, and I got interviewed, but I didn't know if there was like standard questions. So this individual did tell me some stuff, but I'm not sure if it's a complete story. So I'm sharing a combination of that plus my own experiences today. Okay, so let's get to it. So management interview questions. A common interview question they're going to ask. This is one of the few sort of standard interview questions for upper management and executive roles is, what's your leadership style? I hate that question because it's really formulaic, and you don't get a lot of formulaic questions at that level, but that is one of them. I was asked this for a CEO role. I was asked this for other upper management roles. I don't know if I have time to do the answers to the problem is once you get to that level, there's no like one right answer or phrase. This stuff goes beyond that. We're not at that level where like you say the magic words and then you pass. It doesn't really work like that. It depends what they're looking for. Okay. And, but I've answered this question. I've given everyone a sort of cookie cutter answer to this. And the short version is that there's no one leadership style that always works in all situations, in all environments. So the more correct answer is to say, I adapt my leadership style to the situation. And in particular, I've been known to employ, you can use any number here, but I would say 4 separate ways of doing things, particularly in the decision-making and as much as I can in the leadership side of it, the influencing side. And then I would go through them. Now, in the past, I've talked about an autocratic leadership style, which means you come in and you act like a general, and you just give out orders and people obey. And the only time in my career that that's been really appropriate is when you're in emergency mode. You come into a situation where there's panic, there's failure, things aren't working, and you got to fix it fast. And if you know what to do, presumably you do, then this is appropriate, okay? Because if you don't do it this way, it won't get fixed, okay? It's like an emergency type mode, okay? So you come in and you dictate what you want people to do, and they do it, okay? So that's pretty straightforward. Obviously, you can't behave like that in most situations, and I would say like 95% of the time, you can't get away with acting like this. It just doesn't work. This is not the military. You can't use Sun Tzu's Art of War to like be your guide. I know some people try and do that. That's ridiculous, because soldiers are not the same thing as employees. You know, soldiers can't quit. If they quit, like they desert or something, they get shot or they get court-martialed, or, you know, like employees can leave whenever they want. And this is what we found. You know, it doesn't matter how much money you pay someone. Eventually, if they hate what they do, they're going to leave, right? So it doesn't really apply. It's only an emergency type thing. God, you see how long this is taking me to talk about. Another style is, you say, I have a consultative leadership style. So that is that I make the final decision, but what I like to do is I like to talk one-on-one with the key people. So I don't have a group meeting. I have a closed door meeting with each, you know, of a handful of key people, get their take, put questions to them, try to understand why they hold the opinions they hold, and then I take it into consideration. I don't necessarily follow it, but I at least take it into consideration and then make a decision. So that's what I would term a consultative style of decision making, and therefore leadership. Another one would be a delegative style. This is more appropriate for higher level stuff where there's lots of levels of people in the org chart. You know, where you trust your underlings enough that you can sort of give them projects and give them responsibilities and just essentially wash your hands of it. Say, basically, I need this done by this. I need you to come and tell me if there's any issues. Other than that, by this date, I'll expect this result, you know, something like that. Go. You know, let me know if you need any additional resources from me. Other than that, you know, I'm just going to get the hell out of your way, and you can get it done, right? So, you know, that would be the third possibility. And the final sort of leadership style would be a participative leadership style. That's where you get everyone together in the same room and kick a decision around. And the only time that this would be appropriate is if you've got a highly complex decision to make that involves mesh relationships between different people, right? So the example I've always used to illustrate this is that I think everyone can appreciate is when you're making a design decision about a product. Okay, like a key design decision about a product. So say you're designing a car, like this year's model car or something, and you know, you've got the department heads. So this person is the head of the steering department, this is the head of the engine department, this is the head of the safety department, this is the end of the bodywork department, you know, suspension, whatever. And the problem is, if one person makes a change, like say the engine group say, we're going to go with the new engine this year, completely redesigned engine, it's going to be a lot heavier, a lot bigger, right? Well, that obviously affects everybody else's work, right? So you can't simply have that group send an email saying, we're going to have a new engine, deal with it, right? Because that then prevents other people from getting their work done on time, because they had their work almost done in the suspension department. And then they got this memo saying, by the way, the specs have changed. Now we're going with all this extra weight at the front of the car. So you have to redesign the suspension system because the old one won't take the weight of the new engine, right? So it's not as simple as just issuing emails to everybody else. You've got to get everyone in the same room, and you've got to kick this problem around. And all the communication can't go through me. It has to come directly from the people to everyone. So it's very much a collaborative decision. That's when you need that kind of structure. Other people like to do this leadership style because of political reasons. They want to control the decision, yet they don't want to be responsible if it goes south. So they involve everyone else so they can just point to their team and say, hey, these guys made the decision. And I just went with their recommendation. So they can try and wash their hands of it. There's all kinds of political stuff going on with this, but you see how long it takes me to say this stuff, right? That's why a lot of management type interviews are very unstructured, very conversational. Even a formal question, a standard question like, what's your leadership style? It just goes off into all these different ideas. So you basically say, I would adapt my leadership style. I've been known to do certainly these 4, among others, depending on what the situation requires, right? And I have the ability to ascertain which would be more appropriate in what situation, and I switch it up. As far as you can get a standard answer, that's what I would say to that one. Right? So if you're going for an upper management type role, or even like a sort of mid-manager type role, you may get that question, and that would be the general approach to answering. That's how I would answer it, put it that way, and have answered it in the past. Let's just, I think it would be maybe easier to go through the questions, and then we'll get into a Q&A perhaps about the answers. Okay, so another common interview question, or I'm given to understand as a common interview question, is to say, how would you handle conflict among your subordinates, especially if it starts affecting their performance? That'll be a common question. You have to have a good answer for that. The blanket answer to any kind of question involving conflict is usually communication, and that's because that reflects reality, right? If you got 2 people, they got a very contentious relationship, you want to basically talk to them individually about it, behind closed doors where they can speak freely, and then you want to eventually get them together, right, to address it, right? And I base a lot of that stuff on some experiences I had earlier in my career where I had a manager order me and another guy I didn't get along with to go to lunch one day. Just go to lunch and talk about something other than work. And we did. And I was amazed at how that helped. So anything with conflict, it's basically the answer is some form of communication, and the details of how you would do that. That's also, perhaps you might get that question for leading a team, right? If you're like a team leader, maybe at a lower level, perhaps you might get that question too. Okay. How to motivate your team. How do you motivate your team, right? Everybody's going to have their own answer to that. Depends on the industry. It depends on, the culture of the organization, what the history is, and, what people are used to. How do you measure success? Okay. I generally hate vague questions like that. I prefer them to be more specific, but you do get asked these general questions. And me personally, when I get general questions, I give general answers. So, I would say something along the lines of goals and stretch goals. I make sure that both are clear. We're going to shoot for this. And, you would incentivize the different results and all this kind of stuff. How do you make important decisions, right? This is going to be very similar to what's your leadership style, right? Because basically my answer to that question revolves around decision making. How do you deal with an underperforming team member, right? This is also, I believe, more of a standard question at this level, because it's kind of basic, because once you get to the upper management or upper middle management anyway, this, there's a standard answer. You go through the proper requirements as per HR, and there's a standard process for that. It's very similar to what they do at a low level. It's very similar to high level stuff too, except there's a lot more conversations with the person involved. You have verbal, at the lower level, you have verbal warnings, and then you have maybe a more formal verbal warning. that's documented. And then you'd have a formal warning, like a written warning, where you bring the person into your office. You have an HR witness there, someone from the HR department. You have it all written up where, this is my issue with you. This is our issue with you. You record any response they have. You give them a copy to it and it goes in their file, right? You maybe do that a second time, depending on what the infraction is. If it's a no tolerance thing, then you can't do it a second time, like violence in the workplace or something. But if it's something like a performance issue, then you would do maybe a second written warning. And then these carry increasingly steep penalties. So, maybe the first infraction, somebody gets sent home, but their pay is unaffected. Maybe the second time they get sent home without pay, maybe for a week, something like that, and they come back and they have to, and so the idea is that if you progress towards a situation where the person they refuse to improve or fix the issue, you have a long paper trail documenting a long process where you've given them every chance to understand what the issue is, to seek help, and to address it. And if they still haven't done it, then unfortunately the last step is to let them go. And you try to avoid that, but that's what it can come to if it's a sufficiently serious issue. Have you ever terminated a team member? Right? That's a question that you may get asked, because usually at the management level, that's part of your duties. You have to hire, you have to fire. And almost universally, nobody likes to fire people. And it can be traumatic. It can be emotional, depending on the circumstances. And, have you dealt with that? How has it gone? How have you handled it? Right? And then once again, this is a question where the answer, in my opinion, is going to vary quite a bit depending on the culture of who's interviewing you. You know what I mean? There are some employers where they don't think twice about this stuff. There's other times where they go through all kinds of emotional turmoil when they have to fire someone. I mean, it's just a difference in culture. If they're the touchy-feely emotional people that kind of work like a family, you don't want to go in there and be all callous and say, oh yeah, I can do it without blinking an eye. Whereas other people might like that response depending on what their culture is. So there's no right answer for this stuff. It depends what they're looking for. But you would have to have an idea of where you stand on these things, certainly. And if this is why it's important to do a bit of research to kind of understand the place that you might be going to and where their head's at and what they're looking for. How do you handle mistakes at work? I've been asked that. I hate those type of questions because, once again, they're very, very general. If you're being asked this by some kind of executive recruiter, then they probably want some politically correct spiel about accountability and, all this kind of stuff. If you're talking to, a CEO or, a board member or, anybody like that has more skin in the game, they probably want more of a frank answer. With some examples, and they might want an example of maybe something, I don't want to say trivial, but something maybe technical, routine, a routine mistake. Nobody's perfect. And then maybe if you can, they would want an example of something a little bit more serious. You can frame it in the guise that I was just starting out and I did this early on and I learned quickly that that's not what you do. And this is because this is what happened. This is how it turned out. And this is how I've learned. Right. And this question, which came right from my acquaintance there, who runs the highest level, most professional executive recruitment firm in my city, they made mention to me that a particular favorite question of theirs at the CEO level was, where do you get your info? Like, how do you know that the info you're receiving is valid, is realistic? It's what's actually occurring. How do you get your info? And how do you verify that it's accurate? Right? So be prepared to answer that. And once again, that answer, as far as I'm aware, does vary quite a bit depending on what industry you're in and, what size of the organization is, and other factors like that. So, okay, so those are certainly the questions, or the types of questions that you can expect for those types of roles. You're going to have answers. You're going to have answers for these. And generally speaking, if you've been in these roles before, you will have answers for these. You'll be able to talk for quite a bit on these topics, right? And as I say, they're usually in all the situations I've been in, they've been very, very conversational. So depending on what you start out saying, they then prompt you for more detail, or they steer it in whatever direction they're interested in. This kind of thing.